Babysitting should be easy money, but tonight, these stories prove it can turn into the scariest job in the world. Stay tuned, because once you hear them, you'll never look at a quiet house the same way again. This account comes from Lindsay Carter, a college junior from Columbus, Ohio, who swore off babysitting forever after one night in 2021. She wasn't new to the job. Babysitting had carried her through high school, birthday parties, school nights, the occasional overnight gig. She thought she'd seen it all. Cranky toddlers, late parents, even the time a 5-year-old flushed an iPad down the toilet. But nothing had prepared her for that evening on Brookhaven Court. The family, Mr. and Mrs. Weller, were friends of a friend. They lived in a big colonial-style house at the end of a cul-de-sac. The kind of place with trimmed hedges, 2-car garages, and curtains that always looked too perfectly straight. They had 2 kids, Max, 8, obsessed with baseball, and Sophie, 6, shy, the kind of girl who carried a stuffed rabbit everywhere she went. It was a Saturday night. The Wellers were headed to a company dinner and promised they'd be back before midnight. "The kids are easy," Mrs. Weller said as she handed Lindsay the emergency numbers. "Just keep them on their bedtime routine." By 9 o'clock, both kids were tucked into bed upstairs. Sophie wanted her nightlight on. Max begged for just one more story before nodding off. Lindsay lingered long enough to make sure their breathing settled, then padded downstairs. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She turned on the TV for background noise and scrolled her phone while curled up on the couch. For a while, everything felt normal. Until she heard it. A faint creak overhead. Not the usual settling of an old house, but the sound of careful footsteps, slow, deliberate, like someone shifting their weight across the upstairs hallway. Her first thought was Max or Sophie sneaking out of bed. She muted the TV and listened. Silence. Then another creak, closer to the staircase this time. Lindsay stood, her pulse quickening, and moved to the bottom of the stairs. "Kids?" she called softly. No answer. She climbed halfway up and peeked toward their bedrooms. Both doors were still cracked open. The faint glow of Sophie's nightlight spilled into the hall. Everything looked still. She told herself she was imagining it. Houses made noises. She'd finish her coffee, stay calm, and laugh about it when the Wellers got back. But then, the landline rang. The sound startled her so badly she almost dropped her mug. Who even used a landline anymore? She grabbed the receiver. "Hello?" A man's voice, distorted, low, almost buzzing with static. "Don't go back upstairs." The line went dead. Her stomach dropped. She stood frozen in the hallway, the phone pressed against her ear. She wanted to believe it was a prank, but how would anyone know she was babysitting there? And why say that? Before she could make sense of it, Sophie's voice carried down from upstairs. "Lindsay, the man's in the hallway again." Her blood ran cold. She bolted up the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering. Sophie was sitting up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, wide-eyed. Max was still asleep. "What man?" she whispered. Sophie pointed toward the dark end of the hall. "He keeps looking at us. He's smiling." Her breath caught. The hallway was empty. No movement, no sound, just the faint hum of the nightlight. She forced a smile for Sophie's sake, tucked her back under the covers, and whispered, "It's just your imagination." But she didn't believe herself. She gathered both kids, blankets and all, and ushered them downstairs. They huddled together on the couch, the TV flickering quietly. Lindsay tried calling the Wellers, but her cell had no service. She tried the landline again. Dead. No dial tone. At 11:32, the television flickered. The channel shifted by itself, cutting to static before showing something else entirely. A live feed. Not a show, not a movie. A grainy black and white shot of the Wellers' upstairs hallway. And in the far corner of the frame, a tall figure. Still. Facing the camera. Smiling. Her chest tightened. She spun around toward the staircase. Empty. But on the screen, the figure began to move. Slowly, step by step, closer to the kids' bedrooms. Max stirred beside her, rubbing his eyes. "That's him," he mumbled sleepily. "That's the man Sophie talks about." Lindsay grabbed the remote, fumbling, stabbing at buttons until the screen went dark. The silence afterward was unbearable. And then, another sound. From directly above them. In the ceiling. The distinct scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floorboards. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to grab the kids and flee into the night. But the thought of stepping into the pitch-black street with someone or something lurking nearby rooted her to the spot. At 11:32, headlights swept across the window. Relief hit her like a wave. The Wellers. She yanked the front door open before they even reached the porch. They froze when they saw her, pale, trembling, clutching both kids like life preservers. The police were called. Officers swept the home, moving methodically through every room, every closet, even the attic. In the insulation above Sophie's room, they found it. A small camera, wires snaking down into the walls. But no intruder, no figure, no explanation. Lindsay never babysat again. She dropped the job, dropped the neighborhood, and still avoids that stretch of Brookhaven Court whenever she visits Columbus. This account comes from Ethan Carter, a sophomore at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, who thought babysitting was going to be easy money, until one night in October of 2014 changed everything. At 20 years old, Ethan was juggling classes, a part-time bookstore job, and the creeping weight of student loans. Babysitting seems simple compared to everything else. Quiet houses, sleeping kids, a chance to study in peace. That's how he ended up at the Hendersons' place on the edge of town, a Victorian house that looked more like a haunted postcard than a home. Mark and Julia Henderson had 2 kids, Liam, 7, and Sophie, 5. Sweet, well-behaved, but so quiet it made Ethan uneasy. Julia's instructions were quick. Bedtime at 8:30, snacks in the fridge, Wi-Fi password on the magnet. And as she passed the basement door, she added sharply, "That's just storage. Don't go in there." The tone wasn't casual. It was a warning. By 9, both kids were asleep. The house felt still. Ethan poured a glass of water, opened his laptop, and settled in. Babysitting, he thought, was the best gig he could ask for. Until he heard it. A faint, muffled crying sound. His first thought was Sophie. He crept upstairs, checked both rooms. The kids were sound asleep, their breathing soft and steady, but the crying didn't stop. It grew sharper, clearer, and it wasn't upstairs. It was coming from below, from the basement. He froze in the hallway, Julia's warning echoing in his mind. Still, curiosity and the nagging instinct to protect the children pushed him forward. He found a flashlight and opened the basement door. The crying cut off instantly. The air was heavy and damp as he descended the creaking stairs. His light swept across boxes, broken furniture, and cobwebs thick in the corners. Then it landed on something that made his stomach tighten. Children's toys scattered across the concrete floor. Not Liam and Sophie's toys. Older toys. Dolls with cracked faces, wooden blocks worn smooth, a tin car with paint flaking off. And in the far corner, a rocking horse, moving, slowly, back and forth, though the air was still. Ethan whispered to himself, No, that's not possible." His breath fogged in front of him, though the basement wasn't cold. And then, through the silence, a whisper. His name. Ethan. He gripped the flashlight tighter, heart hammering.
The whisper came again, softer, crawling along the floor. "Ethan!" Before he could move, his phone buzzed. He nearly dropped the light as he fumbled for it. A text. Unknown number. The message said, "Don't wake them. They're safer asleep." Panic gripped him. Whoever it was knew he was babysitting, knew about the kids, knew he was in the basement. He bolted up the stairs, slammed the door, and locked it. His mind raced. Call 911, but his screen froze. The call failed. No service. His eyes flicked toward the children's rooms. The message repeated in his mind, "Don't wake them." He climbed the stairs quietly, peeked inside. Both kids were sleeping peacefully. His instinct screamed to grab them and run, but what if whoever was watching was inside the house already? Back in the living room, the sound came again. The basement door creaked, slowly. The knob twisted as if unseen hands were trying to open it. Ethan grabbed a heavy lamp, holding it like a weapon, every muscle shaking. The door stopped, left slightly ajar. Then another buzz, a second text. "Stop pretending you can protect them." He looked toward the window and swore he saw movement outside, a tall silhouette in the yard, watching from the trees. The landline rang, shrill and jarring. He hesitated, then answered. Static hissed, and through it, the same whisper, "Ethan." He slammed the phone down and down 911 with shaking hands. This time, the call went through. The dispatcher's calm voice was the only thing that kept him grounded. Officers were already on their way, she said. "Lock yourself in with the kids." Minutes felt like hours. Shadows seemed to stretch too far, the silence punctuated by every creak of the house. Then, finally, red and blue lights washed across the curtains. Police swept the home. The kids were safe. The house was locked. No intruder. But in the basement, they found the toys, the rocking horse, and something else. Children-sized footprints pressed into the dust, leading into the far wall, and stopping there. Julia Henderson turned pale when she heard. Her hands shook as she clutched Sophie and Liam, and Mark's face tightened with questions the officers couldn't answer. Ethan gave his statement and left, but the feeling of being watched never left him. A week later, sitting in the library, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message said, "Don't forget, I'm still here." He deleted it instantly, but the chill never left. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, Ethan swears he can still hear it. The faint sound of a rocking horse creaking in the dark.
This account comes from Hannah Lewis, who, at just 16, took on a babysitting job in the small town of Maple Hollow, Illinois. It was supposed to be simple money, the kind of job teens take on to buy clothes, pay for gas, and feel a little more independent. But what happened that autumn changed the way she looked at babysitting and people forever. The family lived on a quiet cul-de-sac near the edge of town. Their house was unremarkable at first glance: 2 stories, peeling white paint, a tired porch swing that creaked whenever the wind pushed it. Inside, though, it felt heavier. The air carried that smell of old wood and faint mildew, like the house had been holding its breath for too long. There were 2 children, Oliver, 9, who preferred to draw quietly in notebooks, and Claire, 6, who lined her dolls up in strange, meticulous rows. They weren't bad kids. If anything, they were unusually calm. Too calm. Hannah expected noise, chatter, the kind of mischief kids their age usually bring, but instead she got whispers and silence. Their mom, Ruth, was polite but brisk, giving Hannah instructions as though she'd repeated them 100 times. Bedtime at 8:30, no sweets after dinner. The kids could watch one episode of TV before brushing their teeth. She avoided eye contact when she mentioned her husband. "He'll be home late," she said quickly. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "If anything comes up, just call me." At first, the job seemed normal. Hannah helped with homework, microwaved macaroni, and read Claire a story before bed. She noticed Oliver drawing the same strange picture over and over, an enormous figure that towered over smaller stick figures, its arms stretching too far. She asked who it was. He shrugged and said, "Dad." His voice was flat, too matter-of-fact for comfort. The weeks went by and Hannah slipped into routine, but she started noticing odd things. Whenever the kids got rowdy, they calmed instantly if she mentioned their father's name. The effect was immediate, like the word itself carried weight. Claire once dropped a doll mid-scream when Hannah muttered, "What would your dad say?" and ran to her room without another word. Hannah brushed it off. Some parents were strict after all. But the unease stayed. She didn't see much of their dad, just glimpses when he left for work or pulled into the driveway. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, the kind who seemed to fill whatever doorway he entered. But Ruth always described him as kind, hard-working, just tired. One Friday, things shifted. Claire had thrown herself into a tantrum, refusing to brush her teeth, shrieking until her throat was raw. Hannah tried everything, reasoning, threatening to call her mom, but nothing worked. Out of desperation, she called the father. He surprised her by answering right away. His voice was low, deliberate. "I'll be right there." Minutes later, the front door opened, and Hannah nearly jumped. He was taller than she remembered, ducking slightly under the frame. His boots left muddy imprints on the rug, his presence swallowing the small entryway. Hannah stammered an apology for calling him, but he waved her off with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He told her it was fine, asked casually about school, and then leaned on the doorframe as she tidied the living room. Nothing overt happened, no raised voice, no aggression, but Hannah couldn't shake the way his gaze lingered. It wasn't casual, it was deliberate, studying. She kept her hands busy with books and pillows just to avoid looking back. That night, Oliver spoke up. Hannah wasn't there to hear it, but her mom later repeated it. He told Ruth he didn't want Hannah alone with his dad. "He watches her too much," he whispered. His tone was uneasy, protective in a way that a child shouldn't have to be. The next babysitting shift was suddenly canceled. Ruth apologized over text, still paid Hannah, and said, "We'll figure something else out." Hannah thought it was strange, but didn't push. She was relieved, if anything. Then everything unraveled. A week later, Hannah came home to find her mother crying in the kitchen. Her stepdad was on the phone, his voice urgent. When Hannah asked what was wrong, her mom pulled her close and said, "That man, the kid's father, he's been arrested." Her stomach dropped. The details came slowly, in pieces. There had been a violent altercation, something in town, that ended with his arrest. But worse were the rumors that followed. Years of hidden abuse, unreported violence, and whispers about his fixation on teenage girls, petite, dark-haired, pale, exactly like Hannah. The blood drained from her face as she remembered the night he stood in the doorway, smiling in that way that wasn't really a smile. The way Oliver had drawn those towering figures over and over. The way Claire stopped mid-scream whenever his name was mentioned. It all clicked into place, too late to ignore. Hannah never babysat for that family again. But she did stop by once, weeks later, to return a borrowed book. Ruth answered the door, her face worn thin but kind. She thanked Hannah for everything and pressed extra money into her hand. Then she said softly, "You shouldn't come back. Not because of you, because of him. People are already watching us, blaming us. I don't want you caught in it."
Hannah nodded, heart pounding, and walked away under the dim streetlight, clutching the book like a shield. Even now she thinks about Oliver and Claire, about the house that always smelled faintly of mildew, the dolls lined up in rows, the sketches of a towering figure. She thinks about how close she sat to danger without even realizing it, and how evil doesn't always hide in shadows or empty basements. Sometimes it walks in through the front door, smiling like it belongs there.
This account comes from Anna Wells, who was just 14 the night everything changed. She had babysat before, but only for families she knew from church, families everyone trusted. That familiarity gave her a sense of safety, until the night she realized some dangers don't come from the inside, but from the shadows waiting outside. The family lived in a small downstairs apartment, tucked at the back of an aging complex. 2 bedrooms on opposite ends, a narrow galley kitchen, and a modest living room that opened onto a concrete patio through sliding glass doors. Nothing fancy, but cozy enough for a young family of 4. That October evening had started like any other. The boys, Daniel, 8, and Michael, 6, were a little wound up, begging for one more game and another story before bed. By 9 o'clock, though, Anna had managed to settle them. She dimmed the lights, tucked the boys under mismatched cartoon blankets, and reminded them their parents would be home late. Their mother had smiled earlier, handing Anna a plate of cookies and saying, "You're a blessing. We'll be back after the event." By midnight, the apartment was silent. Anna had finished her homework at the kitchen table, then flipped through the family's small DVD collection before choosing The Land Before Time. The fuzzy sound of dinosaurs played in the background while she curled up on the couch, fighting off sleep. At 2 a.m., sharp knocking jolted her awake. It came from the front door. 3 raps, steady, too deliberate to be the wind or a prank. Anna blinked, disoriented, expecting it to be the parents. But why would they knock when they had a key? She stayed frozen on the couch, eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the knob to turn. Instead, the knocking repeated, louder, harder. A chill crept up her spine. She reached for the baseball bat propped against the wall, a bat the boy's father had once joked was for show. But in her hands, in that moment, it felt like the only shield between her and whatever was outside. Then a voice cut through the stillness. It wasn't the parents. It wasn't anyone she recognized. It was soft, sing-songy, almost childish, but wrong in a way Anna couldn't describe. The voice giggled, then cooed. "Oh dear, that won't help you." Anna's blood ran cold. Her gaze snapped to the patio. She had left the blinds open, and there, framed by the glass doors, stood a figure. The dim glow from the parking lot lamps revealed enough. Short, heavy-set, shoulders hunched unnaturally, head tilted at an odd angle. They didn't move. They just watched her, face obscured in shadow, as if enjoying the fact she'd finally noticed. Anna's instinct screamed at her to get to the boys. She bolted down the hall, heart hammering, and shoved herself into their bedroom. Both were asleep, breathing softly, oblivious. She dragged the small dresser across the carpet, wedging it against the door. The apartment had no cordless phone, and Anna didn't own a cell yet. There was no way to call out. Her only option was to wait. Silence stretched for seconds that felt like hours. Then the boy's small window, a single square of glass above the bed, darkened. A shadow moved across it, blotting out the weak streetlight glow. The knocking started again, this time on the glass. The figure's fist pounded hard enough that the window rattled. Anna bit back a scream. The boys stirred, sitting up with wide eyes, asking what was happening. Anna pressed her finger to her lips, whispering for them to stay quiet, even as her tears burned her eyes. The voice came again, closer now, pitched high like a nursery rhyme gone wrong. "Come now, dearie. I won't hurt you. Just come out." The words slithered into the room, sickly sweet. The pounding grew more violent, shaking the frame, making Anna fear the glass might actually shatter.
The boys started crying, clinging to her arms, and she held them tight, whispering reassurances she didn't believe herself. Then, salvation. A man's voice bellowed outside, angry, demanding, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing?" It was the boy's father. He had returned earlier than expected, and his voice carried the kind of authority that could cut through any nightmare. The pounding stopped. Anna heard hurried footsteps scraping against gravel, then nothing but silence. Seconds later, the parents were at the front door, fumbling keys, then rushing to the bedroom, pounding on the dresser barricade. Anna shoved it aside, sobbing as she explained through gasps what had happened. The father's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the patio. The mother pulled the boys into her arms, rocking them even as her own hands shook. The police arrived quickly. Officers swept the grounds with flashlights, their beams slicing through the bushes outside. They found no one, but the evidence was clear. Shrubs near the patio had been cut and trampled, branches bent in the wrong direction. Someone had forced their way through and lingered there, watching. The officers took statements, promised extra patrols, but Anna barely heard them. Her ears rang with the memory of that voice, that twisted sing-song calling her dearie, like it had known her. She babysat for that family once more before they moved away a few months later. But after that night, she never accepted another babysitting job again. Even years later, now grown, every unexpected knock sends her stomach plummeting. She still freezes for a heartbeat before reminding herself she's safe. But deep down, she knows safety is relative. Because sometimes danger doesn't kick down the door, it knocks softly, smiles through the glass, and waits for you to make the mistake of opening it. Which babysitting story gave you the biggest chills? Let me know in the comments. And if you want even more terrifying tales, check out my Neighbor Horror Stories and Home Alone Horror Stories videos next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a scare.